let's kick it off. We're back. Just I don't really know what to say other than that. I mean, it's basically,
we are alive.
We did it again, in that we brought you to think that we were over, but now we're back, baby. I want to quote John Wick, but I think it might get a little corny. People keep asking me if I'm back. I'm not gonna do it. All right, but so here we are, and my goodness, it's been a while. How long exactly? About a year, 2 years, 3 years? I don't know.
I think I've had a grandchild since we've last met.
Yeah,
sure.
It's been a while,
and I mean, Nick wasn't even a father yet, so a lot has happened.
Amazing.
Yeah, wow. No, how long? Seriously?
About I reckon 6 months to 9 months, somewhere around there.
Okay.
6 to 9 months.
Not that bad,
I guess. Yeah.
I think we should take a longer break than that.
That's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
Okay. Anyway, so we're
just practicing the principle of sabbaticals.
Exactly. We got to get it somewhere. We're not getting a lot of sabbatical elsewhere, and change is good as a holiday, and I really, really play on that principle. I use that a lot. It does kind of work. It gets you a little fuel in the tank, and so forth. But we, although we haven't been very active, in any way that's meaningful, we have been active in ways that are ultimately in the long game that we're quite excited about, important. So I don't know, things like, where do we start? I suppose what happened was, all right, let me just take a step back before we get going, because maybe it'll be a good thing just to kind of run in a little bit and just think about where we're going and what we're even doing here, floating around on the internet with these random little videos that we upload. I think one of the things that I started thinking anyway, and what we started talking about, I know André and myself have had a few conversations around this, is that the podcasting scenario, I mean, it's not like we ever really wanted to get into it like seriously, but it has changed a lot. The game, as it were, I mean, over the last however many years that we've been doing it, it's just, it was a bunch, it just felt a lot more natural to be quite a clunker, just saying your piece and uploading your video, and that was the end of it. And if people are interested, then that's it. But the way things have gone now, I mean, it's pretty pro out there. It's just, and it's not just that it's slick, which it is a lot of the time. It's there's some good material. Like, I really appreciate what people are doing. They're putting a lot of effort into it. There's some good, there's some good content that you actually, I genuinely value. I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't really be able to say that. There were the odd podcasts here and there that I valued with my life, kind of thing, Glory Cloud and those sorts of things. But other than that, it was kind of like, it was more an entertainment. Oh, this is interesting. This is not interesting. I wouldn't really go to certain sources on YouTube, for example.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I just think of, the Ortlands and, the various things out there that just staple quality content that, they're going to be your go-to resource in many ways. So that's great. I celebrate that.
It's like it used to be where you have like really good content that was unbearable to listen to. And then you had like really well-produced content that was like meh. And now the gap between those two things is closing. So you're getting much like better content, more informed content, well thought through content that is also better produced. And I think tech is probably, it's easier. It's just easier to buy like good microphones, good cameras. It's easier to use like AI to edit stuff these days. So I think it is just getting
probably
a little bit.
No AI.
Yeah, well, I mean,
we're using AI. This whole thing is run on AI.
that makes it all that much more blameworthy, I think, to kind of continue the way that we have been that we have been doing things anyway, that we haven't been continuing per se for the last year or so. But just in terms of the way we've been going on till that point where we put our last episode on, in that. It's just kind of that's really no AI was the least of it. I mean, we really have like no editing, no anything to speak of. So the goal for us has always been to just kind of do what we would do anyway. We're going to get together. We're probably going to talk theology. It's always just nice. We've described it before as, you walk into a room, and I think this is still the same. Maybe a little less so, maybe with the polish and everything of most good shows these days. But it used to be like you walk into a room and, a whole bunch of tables, a big dining hall, and you go and listen to that conversation and you just kind of buzz in, buzz out, and that's the end of it. So I suppose that's where we kind of launched, and that's what we wanted to do, just to put a little table together around the Klinean Reformed Baptist side of things, biblical theology, systematics as we see it. And whoever wants to join us around the table can do that, and really no greater aspirations than that. And so I suppose why I'm saying all of that is that, toward the end of the last episode, just valuing all the content around and seeing what's happening, and just feeling a little like overwhelmed in terms of life and all the stuff we have to do anyway. I've just been teaching my brains out in the meantime, and just hardly got a space to just do anything even more relaxed. I just feel like probably there's no way I'm going to be able to keep up with anything like that or anything. So just is it worth it, basically, to keep going? And we've had a few discussions around that. And I think where we landed, feel free to chip in here, but is that, I suppose on the one hand, there is this kind of niche kind of podcast that I find I'm more and more interested in, that if anything, we've probably found a home here anyway. And there's some podcasts that I could sit down and watch with my wife, because it's just, we like to just watch the people talk. So the content is sometimes good, sometimes okay, but it's just kind of we just become friends with them, in some ways. And we just kind of like sit down and have a glass of wine, and it's better than anything else on Netflix and that sort of thing. And, not in any way to compare us with Joe Rogan or anything like that. But I suppose that there is that category where, you're just those long form conversations. It's not overly prepared. There is something raw about it. In a world of AI, I think that is just becoming increasingly valuable. Just to a little bit of rawness goes a long way. I think probably more so than it did beforehand. And
so trying to keep that conversational style, but with theological content. I also think that the Klinean angle is just increasingly important. So it doesn't look like. It's not like any one of us are prepared to say that Kline is the sole source and shaper of any of our theology, but there are some things that Kline just did very, very well that I just don't see that are still very important, and I don't see the issues around those things going away. For example, the church-state conversation is not going away. It seems like it's getting worse, even, it's getting worse and worse and worse. That's not going away. Kline to date has the most robust way of dealing with that from a biblical, exegetical, theological perspective. Obviously Van Drunen's developed that and all that, and other guys as well. But I think that Klinean biblical theological perspective is still very helpful for that conversation. I think the hermeneutics questions are still buzzing around, because as people are confronted with all these different things and different, how to interpret the Bible in relation to church-state stuff, but also in relation to kind of law gospel stuff, in relation to Protestant Catholic stuff, the hermeneutical question is huge. And for me, my favorite thing about Kline is actually just the way he handles the Bible, rather than necessarily the conclusions he comes to, which is what I like as well. But his method is great. Like I think he does, without even trying to, embody principles of early Christian interpretation. Like I think he is very, very patristic in the way that he reads. He reads the Bible, even though he's not self-consciously going back to the patristics to back up what he's saying.
And the way in which you're using
interconnectedness,
fullest sense.
Multivalent.
Yeah, it's
yes.
It's that's such a big point for me. I think Kline has almost prepped me to read the Fathers in ways that I would not have been able to do had I not gone through the whole Kline process. So yeah, I think that's huge. It has that weird, surprising angle.
The value of that, I think, in today's discussion is because a friend of mine has been on YouTube for about a year now, and his channel started to really take off. And he's well and truly involved in the kind of where the discussions are around Protestant apologetics, and it's normally to do with engagement with Catholics and Orthodox and other Protestants. So there's kind of other Protestants who are kind of maybe more biblicist, more fundamentalist, then you've got more mainline Protestants, but there's disagreements there on how to engage with Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. So there's that. But what I think Kline can do is just bring us all to a similar table where you're not having to pretend not to be Protestant when you read the Bible in order to appear respectable to a Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. But at the same time, I think Eastern Orthodox Roman Catholic guys have to respect what Kline is doing in terms of his engaging with the text of Scripture, his typology, his biblical theology. I think this is all very helpful, I think, for developing that conversation.
One of the things that we've been doing, just I think it feels like much of the world is doing this. Maybe that's just the algorithm messing with me a little bit, but in terms of just the conversation between Protestants and Catholics, it's a rich conversation. There's a lot going on that touches almost every sphere of theology and just the way we understand things. And it is funny, just thinking about the benefit of discussing Kline and thinking about his theology. Sometimes you just don't have all the answers and you haven't thought about all the angles that come up. But I found that, just a fallback for me constantly has been like this vision that Kline gives you of Scripture that is so correct. I couldn't imagine the Bible without that vision. And to the degree that a theological system moves away from that, that is for me a protection. It's a kind of protective mechanism, even when I don't know the answers on one particular issue, and perhaps I find I'm actually not convinced by the Protestant position and more convinced by the Catholic position on certain areas. It sort of doesn't matter because there's this, and what I love about it, as you were saying earlier, is that it comes, Kline's thing just bubbles out of the text. It's some really rootsy exegesis that you're dealing with, and it's not easy to dismiss, and it's going to have to be incorporated wherever you go. So it's just a helpful, I don't even know what you call that. I feel like I use the word framework too often, and it's not the right word when we think about Kline because of his paradigm and framework.
My experience with Kline is basically it's a fresh take on old conversations. So you've got, you're looking at the
without
Protestant
intending
Catholic,
to be, for the most part, that's the thing.
For sure, but you take the Protestant Catholic, what is justification? God can't call someone who's not righteous, but then Kline's covenant theology, where our righteousness is in our federal head. Just the covenantal angle that he brings to so many issues: law, gospel, justification.
Yeah, there's a robust kind of thing going on there.
It just thickens the position that is historically where we've landed. Yeah.
So it's relevant in terms of those discussions, I think, as well, which we've been interested in and probably will continue to be interested in along the way. There is although I kind of flipped the switch in thinking about where we want to go in terms of the nature of the podcast to the content. Just what I like about it as well is that, one thing that's happened that wasn't happening before is that you've started your PhD work and are sort of, in the middle of the tunnel there and are thinking around, extra ideas that we haven't really, well, I suppose they've been there latently, but, you more explicitly are coming to the fore for you around your topic. And I think Kline intersects well with that. So
brilliantly.
So it remains a topic of interest in that regard.
One of the things I'd love to do more, because obviously my PhD isn't, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have just done Kline on the kind of intersection between the invisible and visible realms. I think that would have been a much more manageable PhD. But what I'd love for this podcast to do is to feed into some of that, So again, keeping our kind of Klinean perspective, but I'd love to explore Kline's writings around that particular topic, because again, this is an issue that isn't going away. So all the kind of statistics are pointing out that there is at the moment a growth of spirituality. Some of that is conservative Christianity. It's really, whether that's Catholic, Orthodox, evangelical, or something else, but wherever conservative values and theology are thriving, that is booming within Christianity. The other thing is that outside of Christianity, all forms of spirituality are booming. So people are really into paganism and neo-paganism. People are really into shamanism. In fact, shamanism is the fastest growing UK religion in the UK in the last census that I looked at. So people are performing rituals to consult beings from the other side, and this is connected to the Joe Rogan thing and the ayahuasca thing and the DMT stuff that there is an endless fascination about. And I was listening to a podcast recently which was dedicated. I think it was it was the Sean Ryan show. I don't know if you know about that podcast. It's kind of like, for me, it's like Joe Rogan 2.0, but or just like another Joe Rogan. Maybe that's insulting to Joe Rogan. I don't know. But basically, he had a guy and who just the whole episode was about a guy taking DMT to consult with these beings in this other realm. And the prevailing view is that where you go when you're on DMT is not to a psychological location, but to an actual location, another realm. Because of the shared experience across so many different cultures and things like that. So there is now the kind of prevailing view is that you are actually interacting with beings outside of your psyche and with a place outside of your psyche. And there were all kinds of crazy things like that. But Kline was not silent on this issue, like Kline was not silent on the issue of the overlap of the visible and the invisible and how that works out in scripture and why it makes everything Christian so very, very important. And so I think
interdimensional realms, I believe was the
two-register cosmology, it's just, yeah.
But, on that point, and just before I forget to say this as well, the whole, we're saying Kline a lot, but really the name of the podcast, I think this was something else that we've been kind of floating around and, chats that we've had that we haven't recorded and put on the YouTube channel, but we've still been talking and so forth, and we're just thinking about life and taking it. I think it's a good thing to do every now and again with this sort of thing because I really appreciated, for example, the way the Glory Cloud guys just drew it to a close. Hey, we're done here. That's it. Leave it as a resource. Move on. I always want to be open to doing something like that. Just hey, if this helps anyone, we'll leave it there. Is it worth plugging along? I don't want to just do something for its own sake. But yeah, the name of the podcast, Age Sojourner, is really it's good. It's well, it's situated well. It's exactly what we're about. If there is a niche in our discussions, we're just not one of those. We don't intend to be. I don't intend to be one of those podcasts that we'll sort of talk about one thing only. And I think the variety is just kind of what makes us all tick. We're gonna just be branching out and doing. We're getting way out of our lane on certain areas. It's just the way we've always been and plan to continue to do. But there is a niche in all of it, I think. And, it is this two-age overlap of the realms. If nothing else, just the conversation year below as we think about the city to come. I mean, it's just that concept drives all of us. And I think it's a concept that for me, I just can't, I'm not done with whatever I'm talking about until I relate that concept to it. So, it makes sense to stay on that. And I always think that to have a little table, to go and sit at when you need a little encouragement around that particular issue, and that's just a good thing to have out there, just to plug in on a little two-age sojourning conversation year below while we plod along together. That makes sense to me to keep running with for a while, and as we have capacity and time and so forth. On the point of the media or the kind of tone nature of the way we, just moving forward. We've been using Zoom. We've been doing like absolutely nothing. We just literally plug and play, go. So we'll try and just up the game a little bit, because I realized, like, I was watching, most of the stuff that Candace and I watch. It's like, it's crazy. Even just the podcasts, we watch it on our TV. It's like a big TV, and if the video is not good enough to play, it kind of affects the experience. I mean, I really don't care about any of that most of the time, except for when I'm watching TV with my wife, and I'm like, it just bothers me if it's like this really dumb looking sort of scenario. So I don't think I've never actually tried to watch this on the big TV, but I'm pretty sure we would not fare well with our Zoom recording.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a secret to anybody that we're not doing well on YouTube, right? So
are we not doing well on YouTube? Now that is just,
yeah. Well,
I mean, weren't we in the 500 mark though? I mean, it's like legendary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So, like I say, not doing well on YouTube, but and some of that will be exactly because YouTube is a visual media, right? So we're I think it's safe to say that we weren't really putting the effort in to make it a visual media. The YouTube kind of was a bit of a bonus. You could look at it as well as listen to the audio. I mean, I listen to us much more than I watched us. Like our audio comes into my podcast feed, not necessarily into my kind of YouTube.
I mean, I think the Zoom thing's fine when you're on your phone and whatnot, and but it's just it's just kind of like. Anyway, I mean, the point is, it'd be good to just up the game a little bit. So we're going to try. We'll see how this goes, and so forth. That's one of the
Jay's
things.
going to help us.
Yes,
I think
Jay. That's what I want to do. His
best.
Yeah.
Jay. So I'm very thankful for Jay, who is like a tech wizard and has shown an interest in helping us out, and so very thankful to him for what he's done so far with stuff. Other stuff I've been working on, and stuff that I don't know if Mike's going to want to talk about later, but so there's stuff that Jay's put a lot of work in, a lot of hours in already, and so is helping us out. It's not going to be an instant fix. We're going to gradually transform it. So we'll hopefully you'll notice a bit of a difference, and then that will keep developing and keep growing. But I just want to kind of pull it back to something we were talking about earlier, was that one thing I love about podcasts and about YouTube channels is they do feel to me a little bit like your kitchen table, your dining room table. You just go and sit with a different group of people at a different table who are all coming at it from a slightly different perspective, who have something to offer. And we're just one of those tables. But I think what is different in my thinking now is that, and perhaps what we've done before is we've only been a table, like we've only been a campfire, and there's nothing else to invite you to. But that I think is something that we want to work on, something that we want to develop, so that we have more to offer. This still remains the casual front end fireside conversation around theology, but we want to bring you into more, to offer more. And so I don't know if you want to use that as an opportunity.
Yes. So one of the things that I think we had our conference. When was it? Like 2 years ago. It's been a while. But we had that. It feels fairly recent for me. You're wearing the t-shirt, so it's got to be within the realm of. There we go. There it is. And it was great. It was just a little gathering. And we were looking at, even at that point, we were searching for the language. We don't want to actually do a conference. We do a lot of conferences normally, and they take a certain form, and it's kind of like, what are we doing? Seminar feels a bit weird. It feels like I'm trying to sell you timeshare. I just never liked that word seminar for some reason. But what else is there? And then it dawned upon us, the study hall concept is what we were actually looking for the whole time. Study hall. So, you get together, you go for a little pub crawl even, you do whatever you want to do in a study hall scenario, get a few beers, get a few books, get a few pipes and cigars, and now you're rolling. If we could get a few of those going, whether it be once a year or once every 2 years or whatever, that would be something we're interested in doing. We could do it at various locations, whether it be New Zealand. I think the only thing we've got really is Hobbiton, by way of any interesting sort of, well, I know we do have more than that, but, just kind of thinking around ale and pipes and whatnot. But if we did want to do some stuff in Europe, obviously you're there, so that makes equal sense. And I think a lot of the listeners are in the States, so it's a quick little hop over for them if they were interested in joining for something like that. And so, that is something that I think again, it's kind of like the Zoom thing that we started initially. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to try and get together and have beers and talk theology. So, you're welcome to come in and join us for something like that. And, that's the study hall concept. But then beyond that, just getting a little bit more formal and kind of organized with the information. Because the other thing that's sort of become more of a thing is that, all of us are teaching more formally now, and I've developed like 5 or 6 courses at this point. So, in fact, just before I got on here, I put my Hebrew 2 out for this new updated version. So that's fresh and rolling. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff, that's just gathering. And Nick started teaching, and is doing his PhD. Probably will start doing some more formal stuff. I know you've already done some stuff and are thinking around some areas already. So it's just inevitable that we have more organized content that we want to kind of put together. So a study hall kind of website makes sense as well, where it'll just be a matter of figuring out a way to just we'll just put some videos out and make it a course, and just for anyone that wants to, rather than go through random conversations, they can go through some material, and actually, which is latently part of the vision, just to help people see things from a Klinean perspective through different topics, and and broader than that, even whatever else we have going, and that might lead to some kind of online live courses as well, some whatever else we have energy and time for, just creating a platform for something like that to happen. And then the conferences will be these study halls that we have coming up. And man, if you're not sold already on that concept, then wait till you see the website. It is beastly. Thank you, Jay. It is it's just
very tasty website.
It's
very
beautiful,
tasty.
Man. It makes me want to be part of this. Yeah, whether I'm just thankful that I'm part of it, because it's just great, and it captures a lot of what we're about, and a lot better than our little clip art kind of thing thus far, which we threw together, and got a pretty good T-shirt out of, I think, at the end of the day. But I think we're moving in a good place. Am I leaving anything out?
No, I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I think that the thing about the study hall concept that I love is that it's not just us teaching or presenting resources. It's an opportunity to study together.
That's great.
Let's come together and let's study a topic together. And so, I think it will be one of those scenarios where some people will have a kind of greater head start on some topics than others, but anyone could come in and increase their knowledge of a certain topic. And so I think that's the beauty of the study hall model, is everyone is learning, everyone is growing. Yeah. Doesn't matter whether you are the kind of expert in the room or the noob, everybody is going to take away stuff. And I think that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a teacher or instructor or a guide through certain topics, but the idea is that actually everyone is putting in some work, and that you're jointly contributing to a greater understanding on a certain subject.
Totally. What I have in mind, are a few just standalone courses that you could find, anywhere else except for just teaching a particular topic. Perhaps all of our stuff we're teaching anyway, slanted towards this platform, in a nice organized way, and so forth. And then a few courses that hopefully we can teach together. That'll be fun, and just kind of have little moments where we get whoever's on that course with us in a live online session, or again, we might end up meeting them in person in whatever's going on, or just and again, the idea is not really. I suppose we all are interested in education, and we're all part of seminaries, and just care about that. but we don't want to start another seminary per se. We want to just take the heart of what is awesome about seminary and just kind of keep working on that together. And yeah, exactly right, studying together and hopefully getting some guys to teach some courses for us. So we have little models like, you know, I suppose, what are some things that have come up? The Davenant Institute, I think, has been a good model. There's just been, stuff that's really inspiring, and just think we need more.
I want to say Greystone.
Reform Forum, of course, have done a lot of this. Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, not even to compare ourselves to them, but it's just leading the way, and what I think is necessary. Just it feels like a lot of the spaces, like people have done their random seminary experiences, and they want to kind of just
Canon Press. All
right, come on.
I think the number one thing for me is, or one of the good ones I've seen is I wouldn't say it's the number one, but one of the good ones I've seen is Greystone. Greystone is doing some good stuff. I keep wanting to say Grey Skull Academy, but that's
because they got a new He-Man movie coming up. That's why.
Greystone, exactly.
Yeah. Adam. Hi, I'm Adam, the Prince of Eternia.
Yeah, well.
And by the power of Grayskull, the Hill of the Skull, Adam becomes transformed into the new Adam.
Come on now.
There's more. There's more where that came from.
There's a whole podcast episode to do there. Okay. I don't know.
I thought you meant there was one out there already.
Behold the man, He-Man.
Yeah, I mean, I was a diehard He-Man fan back in the day.
He-Man, Adam.
Yeah, He-Man.
I was the Mattel generation. Yeah.
I mean, Adam, man, Adam, He-Man. Yeah. I know it is. It's like, dude, whoever put that name together was thinking about something. I have no doubt about it.
Maybe it was
Skeletor.
Could you please exegete She-Ra for us, please, Mike?
Well, yeah, man.
Well, there is. I don't want to say it, but something did come to mind.
Yeah, exactly. Man. Yeah, good. Yeah. So anyways, those sorts of things. And then we'll show you the website as soon as we get organized here. And but it's kind of almost, it's looking good. And we want to just kind of pull our various sermons together and various whatever we're involved with, So it'll just be a nice little resource, I think, books that we write and so forth, just all in one place. And
but I think it is also just trying to, like you say, so I don't know, I think it's a kind of open secret that seminaries around the world are struggling. The whole ministry pipeline seems a little bit blocked up. I think that probably will change in future generations. There are a lot of young people who are showing an interest in Christianity again. Some of those will become pastors. That will hopefully reinvigorate the pipeline. But there is a problem with the pipeline of people wanting to become pastors, and then those people who want to become pastors training for ministry through seminaries, and then people who train for ministry through seminaries actually then going on to become pastors, and then those people actually staying pastors beyond the first 5 years. So there is definitely a pipeline problem, and that may or may not reflect a problem in the seminary model as it currently exists.
Well, even
and
regardless,
I think and I think that lots of seminaries are scrambling to make up for that. And so I think there are great seminaries out there across the world that are doing stuff in person and online. You can study online, you can get a very good thing. I mean, I'm part of a seminary tutor at King's, which does purely online stuff. I'm still doing my PhD through SATS, which is a purely online thing. And I do feel like there is an inevitability about this, in the modern world, things will just be more online, and that will be the way of the future. But I think we recognize that that's also a kind of very disembodied way of existing. And so,
and with the AI
there needs to be an in-person thing. And I guess where I'm going with this is that what we're thinking of in terms of the study hall, Sojourner Hall, is that it would bring together some elements, the best of both of those worlds. So you will have opportunity to do some stuff purely online, on your own, at your own pace. But there will also be opportunities to actually be in the same room, physically in a location sometimes. And there will be other opportunities, which is a kind of online together, hybrid sort of situation. And so I think that also is a valuable space. Again, it's just taking that campfire, but then or that dining hall table, and then just amplifying it.
Yeah. Good. I was going to say the AI thing. I was actually just come out of it today. I was in a faculty meeting where they were talking about AI, and I think the reference was Dallas University. I can't remember now, but anyway, so someone was addressing this whole thing in AI and just how it's sort of impacted academia and the whole assessment process and whatnot. And man, it's quite a trauma. But anyways, it's just sort of situating itself for a perfect storm. Basically, was the conclusion. And within the next 20 years, the diagnosis was, according to this this expert on education, higher education, that it's for 20 years it's just who knows if we're going to make it through this, but it's just going to change the whole thing. It's going to be really bad before it gets any better, and everyone's just spinning out. So I think that is only there was already a problem, as you just said, just with things in seminary, but now this is just going to push it in a way that probably no one really anticipated. And so yeah, anything, it's all good in my opinion right now. It's sort of, don't let your education get in the way of your learning, and make sure that we have access to good resources. It just has a service at this point, as everyone just scrambles to figure out what things look like. You don't want to be missing out on just some good conversations and good what seminary always has been and should have been. So hopefully, I think all to say that this kind of does warrant a little place, a little kitchen table, whatever we want to call this, a little campfire out there. There's some great stuff out there, not taking anything away from it, don't want to compete with it, but just a little niche. I think it's probably worth our time, and we'll just see where it goes. If it's not any good, then that's the end of that. On that point, one more thing, by way of stuff that's been regurgitating and just kind of coming up again and again for me as I've been processing things and how to move forward. Again, for me, basically the sum of the whole thing is just I've just got to triage stuff so badly because I'm just so busy, right? And so it's got to be important if you're going to keep going with it. Otherwise, you got to chop it. Otherwise, there's just not enough time. But for me, I think one of the things that keeps coming up is that I suppose it's in connection to a rootsy conversation niche styled podcast. But I think perhaps more importantly, just a podcast that's just honest in conversation, because in another format, you have to kind of, when I'm preparing a lecture or preparing a sermon, I don't want to talk it through on the spot. I want to have thought about it and have put it together and presenting something as a finalized form, for better or for worse, but I think more and more there is a real need just to kind of have this honest, here's what I'm wrestling with right now. Here are my thoughts. No one's going to take that as authoritative. I'm not worried that anyone's going to be thrown off the rails by that, but it might just, the reasoning process might be helpful. And I need it anyway. So that's hopefully something that can be part of the ethos, rather than presenting a finalized, we've figured it out kind of Klinean, beautiful Rolls Royce, brand new car. We probably do have something more close to a clunky kind of, I don't know, just a pavement kind of special. But at the same time, hopefully there's something about it that just helps someone to put something responsible together. So I don't know. Those are some of the things that keep coming up for me as well, which I hope to have. If anything goes anywhere with the Sojourner Hall thing, that's exactly what I hope to kind of get at. If we get together and study something, it's that we're doing it. We're trying to figure it out rather than
Yeah, it's like here are the safe boundaries. Yeah. Within those boundaries, let's explore. Let's be honest. Let's be real. I think it's so important though, because so much of the stuff online, even when it's very good stuff, is still angled toward the gotcha moment, right? So it's still angled toward winning a point for your side, rather than conceding points to the other side when that is valid or right to do so. And so I think like having a space where you can genuinely hear the critique of of a different theological viewpoint, whether it's a theonomist or a Roman Catholic or whatever, and be able to concede when necessary. That is a good point. That is right and true. That's something that has exposed a weakness in my current thinking. This is how we need to develop that. That's a rare space. I do think that, like, so it's not just a total free for all where you're drifting on the currents of culture, but at the same time, you've got your boundaries, right? We're not going to stray from Orthodox Christianity, and you set those in place, and these are we're acknowledging up front our kind of perspective. We're Reformed, we're Baptist, we're Klinean, and all that kind of thing. And so that's all up front. But now that all is out in the open, let's engage. Because at the end of the day, we are after truth, not just winning or being
That's
right.
good. That's good, for sure. I'm in. That sounds great. One more thing. We might be looking for a fourth. Three Musketeers are cool, but maybe a fourth would be good. Who would that fourth be? I don't know. We will see. We have a few names buzzing around, but we'll see. It'd be kind of cool, right? Because then the blocks, I don't know how this is going to end up looking.
I mean, it does bother me. Well, this might change, but but the three, they're having the kind of the unequal.
It's like a symbolic bothering. You know?
Maybe I'd finally get someone on my side.
I think the idea was to get someone on my side.
I'm not hoping for anyone on my side, so that's fine.
Yeah, but you know, from the UK or from New Zealand, I don't know. We'll have to think about this. Okay, so there's that. Lots of exciting stuff. See, we've been busy. We've been thinking about it, and just to assure anyone who cares, you know, our 3 viewers on YouTube that don't go anywhere. There's lots of action coming up. And then the other thing, just to kind of move forward, I think, is I just want to let you guys know. Well, I think we should say something about this because it is relevant. But Nick is about to go hang out with David Van Druden. And André and I are going to meet in Amsterdam. That's happening in the next 2 weeks. So there's a lot of Sojourner news here, you know.
We are sojourning. I'm going to Sydney. Yeah.
So we are literally sojourning. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really appreciate David Van Druden, but I'm more thankful that I'm going to be hanging out with André.
Dude, performance
on Pride
anxiety,
weekend. In Amsterdam. But
I'm scared, bro.
Yeah, no. I mean, so hopefully we'll get Dave Van Druden on our. Maybe Nick will make friends, and then
what is this, Nick? Where
I might be able to get him on. Yeah,
that'd be cool.
Nick, what is the event that you're speaking at with
it's Canon and Creed. There's a friend of, or an associate of Mike and I. We know him through the School of Theology, Steve Mackay. He's a Reformed Baptist. I think he did his PhD in John Gill, if I'm not mistaken. And he's at A.W. Pink's old church in Sydney.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, and so Canon and Creed is the name of the conference. And Understanding the Kingdom, Clarifying Christ's Reign in Church and Culture is the actual topic. And so there'll be 3 speakers. Yeah.
Yeah. You, David Van Druden, and that's all we care about.
That's another guy who's a specialty in law. I've got his name here. What's his name?
Like I said.
Benjamin Saunders, an associate professor at Deakin University Law School. He holds a PhD from the University of Queensland and researches in constitutional law. So natural law is going to be a large part of what we'll be looking at.
Sounds very, very interesting. I was going to be there. That was totally on the radar for me. And then changed tack with this Amsterdam thing. So I'm going to do a intensive with Tyndale Theological Seminary, staying at the dorms there and just speaking ancient Greek the entire time. You're not allowed speaking any English for 2 weeks, hanging out with some guys that don't speak any English. They only speak ancient Greek. The only way we know each other, we've kind of been in the same Zoom online kind of cohort thing for the last 3 years together. And, you know, we've got to know each other, but we've never spoken English. It's kind of a weird...
That's so cool.
So it'll work. But anyways, I'm kind of excited about that coming up. And just I've been brought on as a theological consultant for an app that's going to be released for Greek and whatnot. So We'll have some. I'll talk more about that down the line. But yeah, get to hang out with André before that. He's going to jump over from London. And,
Nice.
and
Jealous,
so is that
very
happening?
jealous.
That's happening like right when you're with Van Drunen. So we might have to do like a little Zoom call or something. We might have to do something to celebrate
be
this
there with
greatness.
Pride flags behind them,
Can you believe it's Pride Week?
I think the
weekend.
last time I hung out with André, it was Pride Week in London. I was in Soho, bro.
Yeah,
That was where I went. It was just flags, bro.
that is so good. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, anyways, there's a lot. So we'll have some news. We'll go dark for a little bit longer, and that's kind of again why we wanted to just drop this, just to here's what's going on. But we just got a little bit to do to get through this next season, and then we'll come back and hopefully we'll be locked and loaded. So hopefully you'll take us through what you speak about there.
Yep, I'm sure the content will be available for the website. So
Yeah, well, you can just give us the revised Sojourner version.
Oh yeah,
Allow us to pick
can
you
do that.
apart.
Sounds good.
Good.
I think
Anything
you've
else?
been putting in a monstrous amount of work for this, Nick. Honestly, I think it's going to be.
I've been reading so many books.
Yeah.
Can't wait
it's
to
gonna
not
be
have to
great,
read
yeah.
books about Christian nationalism and theology.
I mean, I would also be excited for that.
I'm
Is
subscribing to like Christian Wolf, Joel Webber, Doug Wilson, just trying to keep an eye on everyone's channels, seeing what they're saying.
Oh, that's painful. Yeah.
I've got Christian
That'll weigh you
nationalism
down.
fatigue. Yeah,
They haven't,
Yeah,
so they
I
haven't
can believe it.
haven't convinced you.
yeah.
Not even a little, man. Well, what else? What can we say?
well,
Welcome back.
there we go. Yeah,
That's it.
I mean, there's a ton of other stuff to say, but I don't know if now is the
Yeah,
time to
I'm
bring up any
I'm
of those
dying
things.
to drill into Andre's PhD. I've got like 20 questions locked and loaded, so
Are
we'll
you?
save
Are you,
those
Nick?
for
'Cause
some conversations. Yeah.
Sometimes
I think what he
feel
means by
like-
20 questions is 20 accusations.
No,
That's
genuine
right.
questions.
Yeah.
And depending on how you answer.
Accusations.
Accusations. Yeah.
Latent accusations.
I
embedded
mean,
within
I still
questions.
keep seeing. I still keep seeing. There was obviously that issue on the Theocast guys over Heiser, and I've seen basically Heiser hate coming from all circles. And I still don't understand it. Like I can totally understand why people would disagree with certain positions he takes, but the kind of like amplified, this guy's dangerous or it's heresy. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know where that's coming from. So, I mean, I think Haas is a very thought-provoking guy, and I certainly don't agree with everything he says, but he's.
Well, maybe
like-
I can throw out my question now. We could pick it up in another conversation.
All right,
Question is
all
going to be around so C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis speaks about paganism as the pre-Christian preparationism. So people, paganism was pre-Christian, and then you've got the alternative view. So he had a positive place for paganism as a preparation for spirituality, if you like, and then of course you've got the tension with the Bible's perspective on idolatry. Demons, the devil, idolatry, blasphemy, heresy, death penalties. And so you've got, on the one hand, this, in a postmodern pluralistic context, a need for spirituality and seeing the value of paganism as a preparation for, a pre-Christian preparationism. And then, but how does that square off with idolatry? So don't answer that now. But that was a conversation I was
It's a
hoping
great topic.
we could have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about
Man,
that.
Justin Martyr.
Because it was very, very
Yeah.
important to C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and I think it has a lot to.
You're answering it
I was
now.
talking. Well, I'm not going to answer it, but just to kind of butter it up a little bit, is that I think it would be a very helpful thing for people to think through in relation to some of the issues going on at the moment, particularly around Islam. So there's obviously a lot of angst around Islam both in the sense that you have nationalist movements that are very anti-Islam.
Xenophobia, immigration, nationalism.
Yeah, and that's connected.
That
I'm not saying everybody in that camp is connected to this, but there is some, there's a Venn diagram overlap with xenophobia and with racism and that kind of thing. And then, but on the other hand, you've also got a Venn diagram overlap with conservative Christianity and its take on what other religions are. And I think that in that conversation, in that tension, the retrieving some C.S. Lewis, but also, not uncritically, but retrieving it basically it would be a very helpful thing to do. Yeah. So I would love to have that conversation for sure.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.